When tech billionaire Marcus Wellington uttered those condescending words to Rosa Martinez in front of his entire board of directors, he had no idea he was about to receive the most expensive business lesson of his career. What happened next would not only save his company from financial ruin, but completely shatter everything he thought he knew about success, intelligence, and the people he'd dismissed his entire life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The tension in the 42nd floor boardroom of Wellington Technologies was thick enough to cut with a knife. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle skyline stretched endlessly, a testament to the empire that Marcus Wellington had built from nothing over the past 15 years. But today, that empire was cracking at its foundation. Marcus sat at the head of the massive glass conference table, his steel-gray eyes scanning the quarterly reports spread before him like a general surveying a battlefield he was losing. The numbers were brutal. A 40% drop in revenue, 3 major clients jumping ship to competitors, and their latest product launch that had flopped so spectacularly it was being called Wellington's Waterloo by tech blogs across the internet. "This is unacceptable," Marcus growled, his voice echoing off the pristine white walls adorned with awards and accolades from better times. 15 years I've been building this company, and now we're hemorrhaging money like a sinking ship." Around the table sat his most trusted executives, each one looking as defeated as the last. Sarah Chen, his chief technology officer, nervously adjusted her glasses as she presented the latest user engagement statistics. David Rodriguez, the head of marketing, kept clearing his throat, knowing he'd have to explain why their million-dollar advertising campaign had resulted in more mockery than sales. Jennifer Walsh, the chief financial officer, hadn't looked up from her laptop screen in 20 minutes, probably calculating just how many more months they could survive at this rate. "The problem," Marcus continued, standing and beginning his trademark pace around the room, "is that we've lost touch with what made us successful. We've become complacent. Soft." He stopped behind Sarah's chair, placing his hands on the back of it. "When I started this company in my garage, I understood business. Real business. Not this hand-holding focus group nonsense we've been doing." It was at this precise moment that Rosa Martinez entered the room, pushing her cleaning cart quietly through the doorway. She moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of being present but unnoticed. Her gray uniform was impeccably clean, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her brown eyes took in everything while seeming to focus on nothing. Marcus barely glanced in her direction as she began emptying the wastepaper baskets around the room's perimeter. To him, she was just part of the furniture. Necessary but forgettable, like the air conditioning system or the coffee machine. "The solution is simple," Marcus announced, his voice gaining the authoritative tone that had once inspired confidence in investors and employees alike. "We need to get back to basics. Forget about customer feedback surveys and market research. Business is about making tough decisions and sticking to them, regardless of what the masses think." Jennifer finally looked up from her laptop. "Marcus, with respect, our customer satisfaction scores are at an all-time low. Maybe we should consider—" "Customer satisfaction?" Marcus interrupted with a sharp laugh. "Jennifer, customers don't know what they want until you tell them. Steve Jobs didn't ask people if they wanted a smartphone. He created the iPhone and told them they needed it. That's real business acumen." Rosa continued her work, methodically dusting the windowsills as the conversation continued. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, but if anyone had bothered to observe closely, they might have noticed how her posture straightened slightly when certain topics were discussed, or how her eyes would occasionally linger on the financial reports scattered across the table. "But sir," David interjected hesitantly, "our latest product rollout showed that we fundamentally misunderstood what our target demographic actually uses our software for. The feedback we ignored early on proved to be accurate. Maybe if we had listened." Marcus whirled around, his face flushing with frustration. "Listened? To who? To college kids who've never run a business? To middle managers who've never had to make a payroll?" He gestured broadly at the reports. "This is what happens when you start caring more about feelings than profits." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of Rosa's microfiber cloth moving across surfaces. Marcus walked to the window, staring out at the city below as if seeking inspiration from the urban landscape that had witnessed his rise to prominence. "The real problem," he said, his voice taking on a philosophical tone, "is that we've surrounded ourselves with people who don't understand the fundamentals of business. We've hired based on degrees and certifications instead of raw intelligence and street smarts." He turned back to face the room. Half the people in this building probably couldn't run a lemonade stand profitably. It was then that Rosa's hand paused almost imperceptibly on the surface she was cleaning. The subtle shift would have been invisible to most observers, but something had registered. A slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of her shoulders. Marcus continued his monologue, unaware of the change in the room's dynamic. "What we need is to streamline our decision-making process, cut through the noise and focus on what actually drives revenue. Too many voices in the room just create confusion." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "But Marcus, some of our biggest innovations came from unexpected sources. Remember the security feature that Johnson from maintenance suggested? That became one of our most popular." "That was different," Marcus cut her off. "That was a technical suggestion from someone who understood systems. I'm talking about business strategy, market positioning, financial planning. These require education, experience, and a certain level of intellectual sophistication that—" He paused, noticing Rosa was now cleaning the area directly behind his chair. For a moment he watched her work with the detached observation of someone studying an insect. "Take cleaning staff, for example," he said, his voice carrying a tone of casual dismissal that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "Honest work, don't get me wrong. Essential to keeping the office running. But you wouldn't ask your janitor for investment advice or marketing strategy, would you?" Rosa's movements became slightly more deliberate, though she continued her tasks without acknowledging the conversation. "The point is," Marcus continued, settling back into his chair with renewed confidence, "we need to remember that business expertise isn't universal. It requires a specific skill set, a particular way of thinking that comes from education and experience in high-stakes environments. You people don't understand business the way those of us who've built companies from the ground up do." The phrase hung in the air like a challenge. Rosa had finished cleaning the windows and was now organizing her cart, preparing to move to the next section of the office. But something had shifted in her demeanor, a subtle change that would have been recognizable to anyone who had spent time in boardrooms where real power was exercised. "We need to trust our instincts," Marcus declared, tapping the table for emphasis. "Stop second-guessing ourselves based on input from people who've never had to risk their own capital, who've never had to make decisions that could make or break a company." As Rosa pushed her cart toward the door, she moved with the same quiet efficiency as always. But there was something different now, a purposefulness that went beyond mere task completion. She paused at the threshold, her hand resting on the door handle, as if considering something. Marcus, energized by his own speech, stood again and walked to the whiteboard mounted on the far wall. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced, picking up a marker. "We're going to make our decisions based on solid business principles, not democratic polling of every opinion in the building." He began sketching out a rough organizational chart, his movements confident and decisive. Clear hierarchy, streamlined communication, and decision-making authority concentrated where it belongs, with people who understand the bigger picture. The executives around the table exchanged glances, some nodding reluctantly while others looked uncertain. The plan Marcus was outlining wasn't necessarily wrong, but his dismissive attitude toward input from other levels of the organization made everyone uncomfortable. Rosa had still not left the room. She stood by the door, her cart positioned as if she were about to leave, but her attention seemed to be focused on something beyond her immediate tasks. Her eyes had moved to the financial projections displayed on the wall-mounted monitor, and for just a moment, her expression showed something that none of the room's occupants would have expected to see from their cleaning staff: analytical interest. "The bottom line," Marcus concluded, capping his marker with a decisive click, "is that we need to stop pretending that everyone's opinion carries equal weight in business decisions. Some people are equipped to understand market dynamics, financial planning, and strategic positioning. Others," he glanced briefly toward Rosa, still standing by the door, "are better suited to other types of contribution." It was at this moment that the foundation of Marcus Wellington's worldview began to show its first hairline crack. Rosa Martinez, who had been invisible to him for the 3 years she had cleaned his office, slowly turned from the doorway. Her posture had changed completely. Gone was the deferential stance of someone trying to remain unnoticed. Instead, she stood with the quiet confidence of someone who had just heard enough. The room fell silent as Rosa's voice, clear and measured, cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Mr. Wellington, with all due respect, your current market position suggests that perhaps your approach to understanding business fundamentals might benefit from some outside perspective." The marker fell from Marcus's hand, clattering onto the conference table like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed Rosa's words was deafening. Every person in the room seemed frozen in place, as if someone had pressed pause on reality itself. Marcus Wellington stood motionless at the whiteboard, his expensive Italian suit suddenly feeling too tight around his collar. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. His cleaning lady had not only spoken without being addressed, but she had directly challenged his business acumen using terminology that sounded professional. "Excuse me," Marcus managed to croak, his voice barely above a whisper. The shock was so complete that he couldn't even muster his usual authoritative tone. This wasn't in any playbook he knew. In 15 years of running Wellington Technologies, no service staff member had ever inserted themselves into a board meeting, much less offered what sounded like business criticism. Rosa remained standing by the door, her cleaning cart beside her like a shield, but everything about her posture had transformed. Gone was the hunched, apologetic stance of someone trying to blend into the background. Instead, she stood straight, her shoulders back, meeting Marcus's stunned gaze with steady, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed facade of invincibility. "I said," Rosa repeated, her voice gaining strength with each word, "that your current market position suggests your understanding of business fundamentals might need some outside perspective." She paused, letting the words settle over the room like a blanket of disbelief. "Your quarterly reports indicate a systematic failure in customer retention, market analysis, and product positioning that goes far beyond what you're attributing to employee input." David Rodriguez's mouth had literally fallen open. He sat staring at Rosa as if she had suddenly sprouted wings and begun reciting Shakespeare. Sarah Chen had completely forgotten about her laptop, her hands frozen above the keyboard in mid-type. Jennifer Walsh looked like she was witnessing a car accident in slow motion, horrified but unable to look away. Marcus felt his face growing hot. The combination of embarrassment, confusion, and rising anger created a perfect storm in his chest. "I'm sorry, but who exactly do you think you are to?" "Rosa Martinez," she interrupted calmly, and the fact that she had cut him off, Marcus Wellington, in his own boardroom, sent another shockwave through the assembled executives. "I've been cleaning your offices for 3 years, Mr. Wellington, and in that time I've observed quite a lot." The word "observed" hung in the air with peculiar weight. Marcus was beginning to realize that his cleaning lady hadn't just been emptying trash cans and dusting surfaces. She had been watching, listening, analyzing. The thought was both intriguing and deeply unsettling. "Observed?" Marcus repeated, his voice regaining some of its edge. "And what exactly do you think you've observed that qualifies you to comment on business strategy?" He gestured broadly at the room, at the diplomas on the walls, at the expensive equipment and prestigious awards. "Do you see anyone else in this room without an MBA, without years of experience in corporate leadership?" Rosa's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not intimidation, but something closer to pity. "Mr. Wellington, I've observed that your customer acquisition cost has increased by 300% over the past 18 months, while your customer lifetime value has decreased by 60%. I've observed that your product development cycle has lengthened significantly, while your main competitors have accelerated theirs. And I've observed that your employee turnover in key departments is running at nearly 40% annually." The room went dead silent again. These weren't general observations or lucky guesses. These were specific metrics, the kind of data that should have been accessible only to senior management. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that Rosa had just rattled off statistics that he himself had been struggling with for months. "How do you?" he began, but Rosa continued as if he hadn't spoken. I've also observed, she said, her voice taking on a more analytical tone, that your current strategy of reducing customer feedback integration is likely to accelerate your market share loss. Your three main competitors, Innovate Solutions, TechFlow Dynamics, and Digital Nexus, have all increased their customer engagement processes over the same period you've been reducing yours. The correlation with their market gain seems significant. Jennifer Walsh was now staring at Rosa with something approaching awe. Those company names weren't common knowledge. They weren't the big, household name tech companies that everyone knew about. They were Wellington Technologies' direct competitors in their specific market niche, companies that only someone deeply familiar with their industry would know about or track. Marcus's shock was rapidly transforming into something else, a growing realization that he was in completely uncharted territory. "Where are you getting this information?" he demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Have you been going through confidential documents? Because if you've been accessing—" "Mr. Wellington," Rosa interrupted again, and this time her voice carried a note of gentle correction that somehow made the interruption even more shocking than before. "Information isn't confidential when it's discussed openly in meetings I'm present for, when executives take phone calls while I'm cleaning their offices, when reports are left open on desks and screens while I'm emptying wastebaskets." She paused, letting this sink in. "You'd be amazed how much business intelligence becomes available when people assume you're invisible." The implications of this statement crashed over Marcus like a wave. For 3 years, Rosa had been present during countless confidential conversations, privy to strategic discussions, witness to phone calls with clients and competitors. She had been in his office during late-night crisis management sessions, present when he'd received devastating news about lost contracts, there when he'd celebrated major wins. And he had never, not once, considered that she might be processing and retaining that information. Sarah Chen finally found her voice. You remember all those conversations? The technical discussions, the financial planning sessions?" Rosa turned her attention to Sarah, and for the first time her expression softened slightly. "Dr. Chen, I remember your presentation last month about the security vulnerabilities in your cloud infrastructure. Specifically, your concern about the authentication protocols for third-party integrations." She paused. "I also remember that Mr. Wellington dismissed those concerns as overthinking and instructed you to proceed with the current implementation." Sarah's face went pale. That's exactly what happened. "And 3 weeks later," Rosa continued, TechFlow Dynamics announced their new security-first approach to cloud integration, which directly addressed the vulnerabilities you had identified. Their market share increased by 8% in the following month." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This wasn't just impressive memory. This was strategic analysis, connecting dots between conversations, market movements, and competitive intelligence. This was exactly the kind of thinking he paid his senior executives 6-figure salaries to provide. "Impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to the room. "You're telling me that you've been, conducting business analysis while cleaning offices?" Rosa's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps long-suppressed frustration in her eyes. "Mr. Wellington, the human brain doesn't stop functioning just because someone is performing manual labor. Intelligence doesn't disappear when you put on a cleaning uniform." The simple truth of this statement hit Marcus harder than any aggressive confrontation could have. He realized, with mounting horror, that he had unconsciously assumed that Rosa's job title somehow limited her cognitive capacity. That her role as cleaning staff meant she was incapable of understanding the complex business discussions happening around her. David Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, his earlier shock giving way to curiosity. "Rosa, when you mentioned our customer acquisition costs, those numbers aren't discussed in regular meetings. Where did you—" "Mr. Rodriguez," Rosa replied, "last Tuesday you had a conference call with the marketing analytics team. You were reviewing the monthly performance metrics while I was cleaning your office. You expressed particular concern about the rising CAC in your higher-value customer segments." She paused. "You also mentioned that the traditional marketing channels were showing diminishing returns and that you were considering a shift toward customer referral programs." David's eyes widened. That's exactly right, but that was a private call with my team." "Private calls become less private when they're conducted in spaces where other people are present," Rosa observed. "Even people you don't notice." Marcus realized his hands were shaking slightly. The full scope of what was happening was beginning to sink in. For 3 years, Rosa Martinez had been conducting the equivalent of corporate espionage, not through malicious intent, but simply by being present and intelligent while being treated as furniture. "This is," he began, then stopped, genuinely unsure how to complete the sentence. "Unprecedented, embarrassing, terrifying, all of the above?" Rosa seemed to understand his struggle. "This is what happens, Mr. Wellington, when you assume that intelligence correlates with job title, or that understanding correlates with formal education, or that valuable insights can only come from people who look and sound like you." The words weren't delivered with anger or resentment, which somehow made them hit even harder. They were stated as simple, observable facts, the kind of matter-of-fact analysis that Marcus had built his career on delivering to others. Jennifer Walsh finally spoke up, her voice hesitant. "Rosa, you mentioned our employee turnover statistics. Those numbers are restricted to executive-level access. How could you possibly?" Rosa turned to Jennifer with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Ms. Walsh, you've been conducting exit interviews in your office every Friday afternoon for the past 6 months. You review the turnover reports while I clean your windows. And you've been making the same comments to yourself almost every week. 40% and climbing." She paused. "You usually say it right after you finish reading the separation agreements." Jennifer looked like she'd seen a ghost. I do say that, exactly that." The room fell into another profound silence, as the full implications of Rosa's revelations settled over everyone present. Marcus found himself staring at this woman who had been invisible to him for 3 years, wondering what else she had observed, what other insights she had developed, what other aspects of his business she understood better than he had ever imagined possible. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington found himself completely, utterly speechless. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in the same boardroom, but everything had changed. The quarterly reports spread across the table told a dramatically different story. Revenue up 35%, customer retention at an all-time high of 94%, and 3 major industry awards sitting proudly on the newly redesigned conference table. But the most significant change wasn't visible in any spreadsheet or financial projection. It was seated directly to Marcus's right. Rosa Martinez no longer wore a gray cleaning uniform. Instead, she sat confidently in a tailored navy business suit, her own laptop open before her, presenting the quarterly customer intelligence analysis that had become the cornerstone of Wellington Technologies' remarkable turnaround. The nameplate in front of her read, quote, "Rosa Martinez, Chief Customer Intelligence Officer," a position that hadn't existed 6 months ago, but had now become the most influential role in the company. "The Southeast expansion is exceeding all projections," Rosa was saying, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had stunned the room months earlier. "Customer acquisition costs are down 60% from last year, and more importantly, our customer lifetime value has increased by 180%. The key has been implementing the granular feedback integration system we discussed." Marcus listened with a mixture of pride and lingering amazement. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't been easy. The revelation that his cleaning lady possessed extraordinary business acumen had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, his assumptions, and his leadership style. The referral program David implemented based on Rosa's customer behavior analysis, Sarah Chen added, has generated over $2.3 million in new business this quarter alone. Our customer satisfaction scores have never been higher. David Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. The segmentation strategy Rosa developed has revolutionized our approach. We're no longer treating all customers the same. We're actually listening to what different demographics need and want. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he remembered the chaos that had followed that fateful day 6 months ago. After Rosa's stunning display of business knowledge, the immediate aftermath had been a whirlwind of emotions, revelations, and difficult conversations. The first shock had been learning Rosa's full background. Dr. Rosa Martinez hadn't just been observing business practices for 3 years. She had been an economics professor at Universidad Central de Venezuela, specializing in consumer behavior analysis and market dynamics. She had published papers in international business journals, consulted for Fortune 500 companies, and held a PhD in applied economics from Stanford University. When the political situation in Venezuela had deteriorated, Rosa had been forced to flee with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her credentials hadn't transferred immediately, Her savings had been frozen by banking restrictions, and she had needed work immediately to survive. Cleaning offices had been honest work that paid quickly while she navigated the complex process of credential validation in the United States. What I couldn't understand, Marcus had asked her during one of their first real conversations, was why you never said anything. Why did you let us treat you like I was invisible? Rosa had finished gently. Mr. Wellington, I tried several times in my first year to offer suggestions. Small things at first. I noticed patterns in customer complaints, inefficiencies in meeting scheduling, simple process improvements. But every time I spoke up, I was reminded that my job was to clean, not to think. That conversation had been one of the most humbling experiences of Marcus's life. He had forced himself to remember those early interactions, and slowly, painfully, the memories had returned. Rosa approaching him tentatively after a particularly difficult client meeting, offering what she had called a small observation about customer communication patterns. He had dismissed her politely but firmly, telling her that customer relations were above her pay grade. Another memory, Rosa quietly mentioning that she had noticed certain software complaints mentioned repeatedly in phone conversations across different departments. He had thanked her for her concern, but explained that technical issues were handled by qualified personnel. Each recalled interaction felt like a small dagger to his conscience. Rosa hadn't been overstepping boundaries. She had been trying to help, trying to contribute the valuable insights she was uniquely positioned to provide. And he had systematically shut down every attempt. The most valuable asset your company had, Rosa had told him during that pivotal conversation, was walking around your offices for 3 years, listening to everything, understanding your business from every angle, and you never bothered to ask what I thought. The transformation hadn't been immediate or simple. Marcus had first offered Rosa a consulting position, thinking he could tap into her expertise while maintaining the existing structure. But Rosa had been clear about her requirements. If she was going to help turn around Wellington Technologies, it would be as a full partner in the process, not as a token consultant brought in to assuage his guilt. You want my insights, she had said during their negotiation, then you need to be prepared to implement them, even when they contradict your instincts. You need to be willing to listen to perspectives you've never considered. And you need to understand that intelligence and valuable insights can come from anywhere in your organization. The first major change had been the most difficult for Marcus, implementing what Rosa called radical transparency and business operations. Instead of limiting strategic discussions to the C-suite, major decisions were now discussed openly, with input actively sought from employees at every level. The results had been immediate and dramatic. Jennifer Walsh spoke up from across the table, pulling Marcus back to the present. The employee satisfaction surveys show something remarkable. Our retention rate is up to 96%, and productivity metrics are higher than they've ever been. People feel heard, valued, respected. Marcus nodded, remembering the resistance he had initially felt to Rosa's suggestions about employee engagement. His old mindset had viewed worker input as inefficient, potentially chaotic, but Rosa had shown him data from companies that had implemented similar approaches, and the correlation between employee engagement and business performance had been undeniable. There's something else, Rosa said, pulling up a new slide on the presentation screen. I've been analyzing communication patterns across our industry, and I think we're positioned to lead a significant shift in how tech companies approach customer relations. She clicked to a detailed analysis that would have impressed any McKinsey consultant. Our success this year hasn't gone unnoticed. 3 of our major competitors have reached out about potential partnerships. 2 venture capital firms have inquired about investment opportunities. And we've received acquisition offers totaling over $400 million. Marcus felt a surge of pride, not just in the numbers, but in the journey that had brought them to this point. The company wasn't just more profitable, it was more innovative, more responsive, more human. The culture had transformed from top-down authoritarianism to collaborative intelligence gathering. But there's an even bigger opportunity, Rosa continued. I believe we can franchise our customer intelligence methodology. Other companies are struggling with the same challenges we faced. They're not listening effectively, they're not integrating feedback properly, and they're missing insights that are hiding in plain sight. David leaned forward with interest. You mean consulting, helping other companies implement our approach? More than consulting, Rosa replied. I'm talking about creating a new division of Wellington Technologies focused specifically on organizational intelligence optimization, teaching companies how to recognize and utilize the insights that already exist within their structures. Marcus found himself grinning. 6 months ago, he had been on the verge of bankruptcy, convinced that his approach to business was the only viable one. Now his former cleaning lady was proposing to turn their transformation into a scalable business model that could revolutionize how companies operate. The preliminary market analysis suggests this could be a $50 million opportunity within 2 years, Rosa added, displaying projections that showed careful research and realistic assumptions. Sarah Chin whistled softly. Rosa, this is brilliant. We wouldn't just be saving our own company, we'd be helping transform entire industries. As the meeting continued, Marcus reflected on the profound personal transformation he had undergone alongside the company's turnaround. The arrogant executive who had dismissed people like Rosa as incapable of understanding business had been replaced by someone who actively sought diverse perspectives, who understood that intelligence came in many forms, and who had learned that the most valuable insights often came from the most unexpected sources. There's one more thing, Rosa said as the meeting began to wind down. Marcus, you asked me once why I never gave up. Why I kept observing and analyzing even when no one was listening. She paused, her expression thoughtful. The truth is, I believed that eventually, someone would be smart enough to recognize that wisdom doesn't have a dress code, that intelligence doesn't require a corner office, and that the best ideas often come from people who see things differently because they experience them differently. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion, and I almost missed it entirely. But you didn't, Rosa replied simply. When it mattered most, when your company was failing and you needed answers, you were willing to listen. That's what separated you from the kind of leader who never learns, never grows, never succeeds. As the executives filed out of the boardroom, chattering excitedly about the new expansion plans, Marcus remained seated, looking out at the Seattle skyline that had witnessed both his near downfall and his remarkable recovery. Rosa gathered her materials but paused before leaving. Marcus, there's something I want you to remember as we move forward. He looked at her expectantly. In every company, in every organization, there are Rosa Martinezes. People with valuable insights, hidden expertise, different perspectives that could transform everything, if someone is wise enough to listen, she smiled. Your job as a leader isn't just to make decisions, it's to create an environment where the best ideas can surface, regardless of where they come from. As Rosa left the boardroom, Marcus sat alone with that thought. The cleaning lady who had saved his company had taught him the most important business lesson of his career. The most valuable resource in any organization is often the one you're not paying attention to. And that lesson, he realized, was worth far more than any quarterly profit report could ever measure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.